First of all, I remember being young and scared, and I started crying for my daddy. And I ain't never stopped loving my father, and I ain't never stopped loving my sister, even if they don't claim me.
Say your dad owes more than $92,000 in back child support for a child who isn't his. You demand Miss Smith and the rest of your father's family apologize for treating you so poorly.
Primarily through the actions of her mother by being very deceitful with my father from the very beginning of their relationship.
Then he should have showed up when I showed up, and when they took blood from me just to have the test, he should have showed up and let me sit in his chair. And there were about 5 or 6 doctors that held me down and blew drugs for me. And all I remember is I kept screaming for my father.
Requesting his presence to have a DNA test done. He was not requested to come to court.
Father, no, I'm his child. And guess when I was conceived? I was conceived when a year later after him and my mother was together.
They were not together for 7 years.
2 months after we been together, she said she was pregnant. 4 months after we was together, we broke up.
Well, Daddy, you and Mama got 2 different stories, and I'm coming to find out the truth.
Because Miss Daniels is a liar.
In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, the atmosphere is heavy, shaped by years of accusations, broken trust, unanswered questions, and families divided by rumors. This is not just a legal hearing. It is a space where generational secrets collide with modern science. It is not merely a paternity dispute. It is the emotional intersection between law and justice, the very theme so often discussed in the game-changing Attorney podcast and reflected in the relationship between law and justice itself. Here, personal pain becomes legal evidence, and personal history becomes testimony. The first family enters the courtroom carrying 3 decades of bitterness. Miss Smith stands beside her father, Mr. Wooten, determined to prove that Ms. Backus is not biologically related to them. Their lives have been overshadowed by a staggering $92,606.06 child support debt, an amount so large it threatens the very stability of Mr. Wooten's life, as half his income is garnished every month. Smith believes that her father has been financially destroyed based on a lie, and that the evidence stage in divorce-like cases should apply here too. If the truth can be proven scientifically, justice should finally be done. Across the courtroom sits Ms. Backus, a woman who has lived her entire life believing Mr. Wooten is her father. For 34 years she has carried memories, explanations, and emotional stories told to her by her mother. She has no doubt in her mind. She believes the rumors, the accusations from Mr. Wooten's family, and the rejection she has experienced can all be silenced by one DNA result. She comes to court not only for answers but for dignity, hoping that her truth will be validated in front of Judge Lauren Lake. As the testimony begins, the layers of this complicated family history unfold. Miss Smith explains that her father's struggles began long ago when he supposedly failed to show up for a DNA test in her childhood. She insists he never received any notification back then, no court order, no appointment letter. She believes the system failed her father, and she now seeks correction, almost like a real-life example from the Divorce Course podcast, where unresolved mistakes from the past resurface in painful ways. Ms. Backus counters with her own childhood memories, being a young girl crying in a doctor's office as blood was drawn during the test she thought her father was part of. She remembers calling for him and not understanding why he wasn't there. For her, this is not just a legal issue. It is the emotional wound of a child feeling abandoned. She insists the absence was not her mother's deceit, but Mr. Wooten's choice. As Judge Lauren Lake listens, she pieces together 2 sharply different narratives built from the same timeline. Each side carries its own emotional truth, but DNA is the only truth the court can rely on. The courtroom becomes tense as family history is laid out like a mosaic of broken pieces. Miss Smith speaks on behalf of her father, painting a picture of a manipulative relationship where Ms. Backus's mother was financially motivated, inconsistent, and dishonest. She recalls years of rumors and the discomfort of growing up with suspicion hanging over her family like a shadow. Her gestures, tone, and controlled frustration show she has lived through decades of emotional conflict, constantly unsure whether she had another sister or whether the entire story was a fabrication. Ms. Backus, however, passionately defends her mother. She believes her mother was emotional, dramatic, complicated, yes, but not deceitful about who fathered her. She recalls how she was included in the Wooten household when she was young. Photographs show her standing beside Mr. Wooten's family, smiling, hugged, and accepted. These images represent moments when she felt valued, moments she believes reflect genuine connection. She cannot understand how those memories could be meaningless if she was never truly part of the family. Evidence is presented: the original birth certificate with no father listed, the handwritten name on the newer one, funeral photos, Facebook posts, and bits of family gossip that have circulated for decades. The courtroom feels more and more like a living example of adverse inference in Evidence Act discussions, where silence, doubt, and missing information often become as meaningful as what is actually presented. Judge Lauren Lake listens carefully, repeatedly reminding both sides to remain respectful. She recognizes the deep emotional injury driving each person. She sees not adversaries but wounded adults whose childhoods are still speaking through them. But despite the stories, memories, and the pain, the court cannot decide based on emotion. DNA test results stand as the highest form of truth in paternity cases: clear, unbiased, scientific. It is the ultimate form of evidence, similar to the stories shared on podcasts about people who took DNA tests and realized people regret taking them because once truth appears, it cannot be undone. This moment becomes a symbolic reflection of the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not about who feels right. It is about what can be proven. As the results are prepared, the tension in the courtroom becomes palpable. Ms. Backus, who has lived for 34 years believing in one truth, stands with confidence mixed with fear. Ms. Smith, driven by the burden of financial devastation and years of suspicion, waits for relief. Mr. Wooten looks conflicted, carrying both guilt and uncertainty, and perhaps some hope that everything will finally be resolved. Judge Lauren Lake, holding the envelope that contains the answer, reminds the courtroom of the gravity of this moment. She emphasizes that DNA is unbiased, offering neither comfort nor cruelty. It only reflects biological fact. When the results are read, everything changes. The courtroom hears the words that permanently shift the emotional landscape of the family. Mr. Wooten is not Ms. Backus's father. The shock is immediate. Ms. Backus, who had entered with such confidence, crumbles inside. She does not receive the emotional justice she believed she would. Instead, she faces a truth that rewrites her identity, her memories, and her sense of belonging. She apologizes to the Wooten family, but the apology carries the weight of a lifetime of confusion and misplaced loyalty. It is not just regret, it is grief. Miss Smith receives validation, yet even in victory there is no joy. Because truth may set people free, but it also breaks illusions, and sometimes those illusions kept people emotionally alive. Mr. Wooten expresses compassion and sorrow, acknowledging that despite the legal truth, Ms. Backus will always feel like a daughter to him. His emotional response embodies the reality that justice and love do not always align, a recurring theme explored in podcasts about adoption stories, full episodes, where biological and emotional bonds do not always match. But the legal consequences remain. Judge Lauren Lake explains that the back child support, over $92,000, may not disappear despite the DNA result. That is a matter for the home state's court to decide. And though justice has been found in truth, the system may not correct the financial damage, echoing the painful gap between law and justice. Yet Ms. Backus promises to help Mr. Wooten fight that battle, demonstrating a strange, bittersweet loyalty. Even after learning he is not her father, she carries love, grief, and a desire to do what is right. It is a moment reminiscent of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals face painful truth yet choose healing over bitterness. This first case closes on a complicated emotional note. Truth has been revealed, but healing will take much longer. After the emotional weight of the first case settles in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, another family steps forward, young, conflicted, and carrying the emotional chaos of modern relationships, mistrust, and unstable commitments. If the first case represented decades of unresolved confusion, this second one represents the complications of young love, betrayal, and the fear that truth may end whatever fragile family still exists. Miss Gregory stands before the court, visibly pregnant and emotionally exhausted. She has petitioned the court for a DNA test to prove that Mr. Elston, her fiancé until 2 weeks ago, is the biological father of her young son Carson. She believes the relationship can be saved if she can show him the truth. Her hope is not simply legal, it is deeply personal. She wants her family to survive. Her narrative sounds like stories often shared on the Divorce Course podcast, where couples struggle under pressure, suspicion, and outside influence. Mr. Elston enters the courtroom with a different energy. He carries doubt, frustration, and embarrassment. He insists he is not Carson's father and that his ex's boyfriend is the biological father. His sister, who stands beside him in fierce support, strongly agrees. The courtroom atmosphere immediately reflects tension, spouses divided, siblings united, and the truth waiting beneath layers of secrets. Judge Lauren Lake begins by examining the emotional core of the case, Miss Gregory's desire to protect her family. She asserts that her unborn child and her toddler deserve stability and presence from their father. The judge listens carefully, knowing that emotional hopes cannot substitute for legal evidence. When Judge Lake turns to Mr. Elston, his explanation reveals a deeper issue, trust broken long before DNA results. He explains how people would call him while he worked out of town, warning him that his partner might be cheating. These cheating stories, frequently retold in the courtroom and on social platforms, show how suspicion quickly becomes poison in relationships. He even sent family members to check on her, turning private life into a surveillance mission. His sister then claims that she personally witnessed Miss Gregory's ex-boyfriend's truck at the apartment, creating an image of betrayal in the mind of the courtroom long before any evidence is presented. Miss Gregory strongly denies the claim, stating her ex lives multiple states away. Her firm denial, however, conflicts with the next revelation, her complicated romantic history. She explains how she and Mr. Elston first met, through her ex-boyfriend at a basketball game, while both she and Elston were already in separate relationships. Emotional vulnerability and relationship instability set the foundation for what came after. Judge Lauren Lake, with her signature clarity, points out the glaring truth. The relationship began with mutual cheating, which inevitably leaves a trail of mistrust. A real psychological pattern often discussed in Truth Changes Everything podcast episodes, where starting dishonestly often predicts future relational chaos. The timeline of intimacy becomes central to the courtroom's focus. Miss Gregory reveals she was pregnant before discovering it, and that Mr. Elston initially did not believe her. She felt abandoned by him during pregnancy, which contributed to her fear of losing him again. Mr. Elston does not deny he distanced himself. When he finally came to the hospital after the baby was born, he looked at Carson and declared that the baby didn't look like him. Physical features, eyes, nose, skin tone, became emotional indicators for him, showing how human beings often misinterpret biology through the lens of insecurity. His sister adds fuel to the narrative, stating that his other children from previous relationships all looked like him immediately, implying that Carson's appearance alone disqualified him. Judge Lauren Lake, however, knows that biology cannot be determined by assumptions alone. She reminds the court that features vary widely and DNA, not emotions or assumptions, provides the truth. As the case intensifies, the courtroom learns that the couple rekindled their relationship after Carson's birth. They became engaged, they planned a future, and she became pregnant again. But old doubts resurfaced, leading to the collapse of their engagement just 2 weeks prior to the hearing. Their young ages and emotional volatility create a narrative often mirrored in relationship between law and justice discussions, where the court must navigate the messy human reality behind legal questions. Judge Lake then examines the evidence. The sister provides social media posts showing Miss Gregory hugging her ex-boyfriend during the same period she claims exclusivity with Mr. Elston. The timing of images, the romantic captions, the body language, all signal to the judge that the truth may not be as simple as Miss Gregory initially presented. When questioned, Miss Gregory insists she was not intimate with her ex during the month of conception. But then she reveals something unexpected. During that time, she had a threesome with her friend's boyfriend. It becomes clear that her timeline was not only incomplete but misleading. Judge Lake emphasizes that the courtroom cannot function without complete honesty. This moment highlights a real-world example of why people regret taking DNA tests, because once they reveal the truth, the entire foundation of their relationships is exposed. The revelation shocks the courtroom. Even Mr. Elston's sister is stunned by the unfolding complexity. Judge Lake tries to maintain order while emphasizing that truth is essential, no matter how painful or humiliating it may be. Miss Gregory admits the relationship with her ex still existed in emotional form, even as she denies physical intimacy during the conception month. But Judge Lake points out that emotional attachments often overlap with physical ones, especially in unstable relationships. The courtroom senses Miss Gregory's fear. If the DNA result proves her wrong, she might lose not just her fiancé but her entire vision of family. Miss Gregory maintains that despite her mistakes, she knows Carson belongs to Mr. Elston because the actual conception month was March, when she insists she was only with him. But the credibility of her timeline has already been damaged. Judge Lauren Lake turns her attention to the emotional reality of the situation. Carson is not simply a legal question. He is a real child who calls Mr. Elston Dad. Mr. Elston reveals that he has bonded deeply with the child, emotionally investing in him despite his doubts. His tears expose his internal struggle, wanting to trust, wanting to build a family, but feeling betrayed by the circumstances surrounding conception. The truth the court is about to uncover holds the power to destroy or rebuild lives. It echoes the emotional narratives in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where people face the consequences of their actions and find healing only by accepting the truth. Miss Gregory expresses her hope that the results will save their family. She wants her son, an unborn child, to grow up with both parents. She wants stability, unity, and forgiveness. But Mr. Elston reveals his own fear, that the truth will leave him responsible for a child who is not biologically his, or force him to detach from a child he already loves. The emotional stakes are overwhelming for both. As Judge Lauren Lake prepares to open the DNA results, She explains once more that the courtroom is a place of truth, not judgment. Her words echo legal themes covered in the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, reflecting how attorneys and judges must navigate not only evidence but also human suffering. The envelope is opened, silence falls. When the result is announced, Mr. Elston is not Carson's father. The courtroom transforms emotionally. Miss Gregory's face shows heartbreak and shock. She realizes her insistence was not rooted in truth. This moment becomes a living example of why truth changes everything, because once revealed, lives can no longer continue in the same direction. Mr. Elston breaks down, expressing a mix of devastation and relief. He reveals he still loves Carson and does not want to abandon him. His emotional reaction shows that biological truth does not erase emotional bonds. This tension mirrors real-life debates about Supreme Court child support cases, where biological and emotional fatherhood often conflict. Judge Lauren Lake turns to Miss Gregory, urging honesty. When pressed on who the actual father might be, she finally says the words she avoided the entire hearing. "I'm not sure." This moment of raw honesty marks the first time she takes responsibility for the confusion. She acknowledges her mistakes, her fear, and her desperation to keep her family together. Judge Lake recognizes the courage it takes to admit the truth. For the first time that day, the courtroom experiences a moment of emotional clarity, a moment that mirrors the deeply reflective stories often told in adoption stories' full episodes, where identity and parentage are complex, painful, and transformative. As the truth settles like a heavy stone in the courtroom, the emotional aftermath unfolds with raw intensity. Judge Lauren Lake watches carefully, understanding that a DNA result does more than determine paternity. It rewrites stories, identities, and futures. Carson's biological truth stands firm. Mr. Elston is not his father. But what this means for the people in front of her is far more complicated. Mr. Elston wipes his eyes, visibly shaken. For months he had battled doubt, fear, rumors, and emotional turmoil. He had been torn between wanting to believe the woman he loved and wanting to protect himself from heartbreak. Now, with the truth confirmed, he faces a different kind of pain, the grief of losing a child he had mentally and emotionally claimed as his own. The courtroom feels the weight of his devastation. His reaction mirrors the deeply emotional confessions shared in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where individuals confront difficult truths that reshape their sense of self. Miss Gregory stands across the courtroom in emotional collapse. She had come hoping DNA would bind her family back together, hoping one result could repair a relationship strained by mistrust. Instead, the truth has unraveled every expectation she carried. The confidence she brought into the courtroom dissolves into regret and clarity. She acknowledges, perhaps for the first time, the consequences of her choices. Her admission, "Not sure who the father is," echoes through the room. It is the hardest truth she has ever spoken, and the courtroom witnesses the moment. A person faces their own reality without excuses. Judge Lauren Lake, in her calm authority, addresses the couple with compassion but also firmness. She reminds them that the court is a place where truth must outweigh comfort. She acknowledges the emotional chaos and the complicated timeline, but she emphasizes that now there is an opportunity to move forward honestly. The situation is painful, but it is no longer clouded by uncertainty. The truth, as often explored in Truth Changes Everything podcast discussions, has stripped away illusions so real healing can begin. The judge turns to Miss Gregory first. She explains that although the situation is heartbreaking, the responsibility to identify the biological father now rests fully on her. This responsibility is not meant as punishment, but as a step toward clarity and justice. mirroring the foundational principles discussed in philosophical conversations about the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not about shame. It is about accountability and truth. Miss Gregory nods, tears streaming down her face. She admits that her fear of losing Mr. Elston made her hold onto a narrative she wished were true. Her emotional plea reflects themes commonly discussed in the relationship between law and justice, where personal desire often collides with legal reality. She expresses the hope that someday Carson will understand she was young, confused, and desperate, not malicious or uncaring. Turning to Mr. Elston, Judge Lake acknowledges his pain with empathy. She recognizes that the emotional bond he formed with Carson does not disappear simply because the DNA test says otherwise. She reminds him that many families, particularly in adoption stories, full episodes and blended family experiences, form unbreakable bonds without biological connection. What matters now is his choice, whether to continue being a presence in Carson's life or step back to protect his emotional well-being. The decision is his alone, and the judge respects the emotional weight behind it. Mr. Elston expresses deep conflict. He admits he loves Carson, that the child calls him dad, and that walking away feels like losing a part of himself. But he also expresses fear of raising a child who might later drift away, and fear of being repeatedly hurt by lies and mistrust. His emotional honesty shows that the courtroom has shifted from confrontation to vulnerability. It is no longer about accusation, but about figuring out how each person can move forward without carrying the burden of confusion. Judge Lauren Lake, understanding the sensitivity, explains that the legal obligations regarding child support or parental rights will depend on future choices, not on the result revealed that day. She draws a parallel to Supreme Court child support cases where emotional fatherhood and legal fatherhood often collide, reminding them that legal decisions must always follow truth, even when truth is painful. The courtroom quiets as the judge begins to close the case. She reflects on how DNA testing has transformed modern legal disputes. It has provided clarity where once there was only speculation, and it has taken the place of rumor, assumption, and generational mistrust. She explains that while DNA test results may bring pain, they also create a path forward unclouded by doubt. In families fractured by confusion, truth becomes the first step toward rebuilding. She further explains an important legal principle. In situations involving conflicting testimonies and incomplete timelines, adverse inference in Evidence Act principles sometimes apply, meaning that when a person withholds critical information or avoids full disclosure, the court may infer that the hidden truth could undermine their claims. This does not apply formally in this paternity court setting, but the concept illustrates why honesty is crucial. The judge acknowledges the emotional wounds Miss Gregory carries and the trauma Mr. Elston experienced as a partner navigating uncertainty. She highlights how critical emotional responsibility is in relationships, echoing topics from the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal professionals emphasize that truth must guide both personal life and the justice system. As the couple prepares to leave, the judge gives one final message, one that encapsulates everything the courtroom has witnessed. She reminds them that while the law deals with biological truth, life deals with emotional truth. She quotes a common theme from legal psychology: truth will hurt you before it heals you, but lies will comfort you before they destroy you. It is a moment of wisdom that lingers heavily in the air. Miss Gregory approaches Mr. Elston softly as the hearing concludes. She apologizes, not just for the confusion but for the pain she caused him. Her apology carries sincerity, humility, and grief. In her expression, one can see a young woman realizing the destructive power of avoidance and half-truths. She hopes he can find forgiveness someday, even if they cannot repair their relationship now. Mr. Elston listens quietly. His grief is fresh, but beneath it is a flicker of compassion. He tells her he cares about Carson and hopes the child will grow up in truth. He expresses hope that Miss Gregory will take the necessary steps to identify the biological father and create a future built on transparency. His response mirrors the emotional journeys often depicted in podcasts about adoption, family truth, and long-hidden secrets, where people learn to navigate pain with maturity. Judge Lauren Lake dismisses the case and the courtroom empties gradually, yet the emotional impact remains. Two families in one session have faced truths that uprooted everything they once believed. The first spent decades believing a lie. The second spent months hopping for a truth that did not exist. Both walked into the courtroom with certainty, one certain of a lie, one certain of a hope, and both left with clarity they did not expect. In the hallway outside, the atmosphere is quieter, reflective. Miss Gregory holds her stomach protectively, contemplating the child she is carrying. She wonders what her future will look like now, what choices she must make, what conversations lie ahead, and how she will eventually tell Carson the truth. It is a burden she cannot avoid any longer, a burden she must now approach with honesty. Mr. Elston steps out with his sister by his side. She supports him emotionally, recognizing the deep pain beneath his calm exterior. He feels grief, not only for the loss of fatherhood but for the loss of trust, the collapse of a future he once imagined. His tears are not just about the DNA result. They are about the emotional betrayal and the realization that loving someone does not always mean building a life with them. As both families depart, Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom returns to silence, ready for the next story, the next truth, the next emotional unraveling that paternity cases often bring. Because unlike fictional dramas, these hearings reflect real lives, real sufferings, and real consequences. They show the delicate balance between law and justice, between emotion and evidence, and between hope and truth. In the end, both cases illustrate a single powerful message. DNA tests reveal biological reality, but what people do with that truth determines the future. Some people regret taking the test because it destroys the stories they held onto. Others feel relief because it ends decades of confusion. But every result, no matter how painful, opens the door for healing, honesty, and a life built on truth rather than assumption. And that, ultimately, is the purpose of Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom. A place where truth is not feared but faced. Where justice is not perfect but pursued. And where every person learns, sooner or later, that truth really does change everything.